Hello, I am Peter Okwocha. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. After the resignation of Algeria's Abdelaziz Bouteflika, where does the country go from here?
We hope again that the situation improves with the new government and that the country thrives. Long live Algeria.
$1 billion plundered in the Gambia. Former President Yahya Jammeh and his associates are accused of widespread looting. Demonstrators have taken to the streets in South Africa's Johannesburg township of Alexandra to demand better public services. Also on the program, fishy business. Kenya's government is to lift a 4-month ban on fish imports, much to the dismay of local fishermen.
Coming to the lake at times and getting no catch while you have a family to feed. If we can diversify, even in farming, that would assist us.
And in sport, African football players have been reacting to the racial abuse of Juventus star Moise Kean. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The outgoing Algerian president, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, has issued a farewell message to his people. Mr. Bouteflika said he was proud of his time in office, but admitted he'd made some mistakes and asked Algerians to forgive his shortcomings. There were celebrations in the streets of the capital Algiers as Mr. Bouteflika was forced to resign with immediate effect on Tuesday after 20 years in power. Protesters have vowed to fight on to demand sweeping changes to the country's entire political system. Mr. Bouteflika was Algeria's longest-serving leader and was set to run for a 5th term in office, but that proved to be the beginning of the end of his presidency. In February, tens of thousands of people demonstrated in several cities against Bouteflika's candidacy, chanting "No Fifth Mandate," ignoring laws that have banned protests since 2001. Responding to the protesters' demands, Mr. Bouteflika pledged not to run in elections scheduled in April. But those promises weren't enough, though. The protests continued, the army declared him unfit to rule, and eventually, after 2 decades in charge, Abdelaziz Bouteflika finally confirmed that he would step down. Rana Jawad looks back at Mr. Bouteflika's political career.
A military officer in Algeria's final years under French colonial rule, a foreign minister for over a decade, and a coup participant. Abdelaziz Bouteflika's gradual rise to the presidency in 1999 appeared to be driven by both design and circumstance. His primary task was to rebuild the country and its economy. But first, he needed to end Algeria's brutal but dying civil war, sparked by the military's refusal to recognize the election victory of the Islamic Salvation Front in the early 1990s. A range of amnesties were granted to local Islamist militants. It was a strategy with initial successes that were later partially reversed through a newborn insurgency led by Al-Qaeda in the country's vast desert. Over time, President Bouteflika's rapprochement with the West and openness to economic reform did little in the way of freeing the state from its dependency on oil revenues, reducing public debt, and defeating growing unemployment. Born in Morocco in 1937, President Bouteflika went on to rule Algeria for 20 years through landslide election victories tainted by a leadership that prevented the rise of any political opponent that could replace the president or his ruling party, the National Liberation Front. In more recent years, even senior members of the country's military and intelligence services were quietly sidelined. The man who once said he would not accept being 3/4 a president spent his last years in a wheelchair after a stroke in 2013, rarely appearing in public and fueling fierce debate over who was really in charge. Despite this, he was put forward as a candidate for a 5th term in office in 2019. This sparked massive and rare public protests challenging that prospect and the ruling party's grip on Algeria. Whether by design or circumstance, this man managed to survive Algeria's tumultuous history and the 2011 upheaval in neighboring countries that toppled long-serving heads of state, however unlikely it seemed in his final years at the helm. Rana Jawad, BBC News.
In a moment, I'll be speaking to my colleague Nahed Abu Zaid from BBC Arabic. But first, let's talk to Imad Lamouri from Tipasa in Algeria. He's a radio and TV show host and producer. Imad, what's your reaction to Abdelaziz Bouteflika finally agreeing to step down?
Hi. First of all, I say we because we feel and we talk like a person. One person relieved, because we feel relieved, and now it's not. We don't know actually if it's the end or the beginning, because it's the end of an era and it's the beginning of a new Algeria. And now this is the point. We feel that it is the new Algeria.
Imad, I'm afraid the line to you is not very clear, but I'm going to try one last question. Will the fact that Mr. Bouteflika has agreed to step down, will this stop the protests?
No, not at all, because it's the first step of the whole project of changes, and we are happy, we are relieved about Bouteflika's resignation, but this is only the first step. We are going out on Friday, we are going out on other Fridays, and maybe every day, because last night, after the news had been announced about Bouteflika's resignation, people went out at 10 at night. So we won't stop claiming our rights, we won't stop wanting a new Algeria.
Okay, Imad Lamouri speaking to me from Tipasa in Algeria. Let's speak to Nahed now. You heard what he said there. You know, it's not going to stop the protests. What exactly do they want?
Well, what happened yesterday and today is nothing short of a historic turnaround in politics inside Algeria. Despite all the, the used rhetoric, Bouteflika did not really voluntarily resign. He was pushed, because if he wanted to resign, he could have done that a long time ago. When he announced his intentions to resign, he said there will be followed or preceded by a number of important declarations. They never came. So what happened was a spur-of-the-moment thing yesterday, that he was faced with the option resign or resign, no third option. So he chose to resign and go willingly. The people in the street want the entire top cream of the regime to go, because they say, as they say in Algerian, "Nruhu ga." "Nruhu ga" means in Algerian dialect, everybody needs to go. Everybody is the old guards and people who are closely associated with the regime.
But is that possible, to sack a whole government? Wouldn't there be a vacuum if that were to happen?
There will be a certain delicate distinction. Now, how is this going to be defined is anybody's guess. But the distinction needs to be made between the regime and the system. The regime is the close circles around the president or the presidency, because those family members who were active in the presidency in the last few years when Abdelaziz Bouteflika was incapacitated also are part of this top echelon that the people want to go. But the system is judicial, economic, political, as well as social. Everybody seems to be in agreement that the social fabric of Algeria needs to withstand any shocks. Now, how is this going to translate? Who is going to negotiate on behalf of the popular movement? It remains to be seen, because there is no clear leadership as yet.
That brings me to my third question to you. It's a question which we've asked over the last few years because of his ailment. But who is in charge of Algeria now that Mr. Bouteflika is formally gone?
There is the constitutional way, and that is the president, the Speaker of the House is the one that the Constitution stipulates needs to take charge. And that's why the Constitutional Council took hours for a declaration that should take really minutes, because it's not like the impeachment. This is one of resignation. So the presidency is vacant. All they needed to say, we've received the resignation, and now we will forward it to the National Council, the Parliament. Now, the Speaker is the one who needs to take charge. However, the Speaker is also questionable because under constitutional law, he needs to be Algerian only. He holds two citizenships, according to what some say, yes. Moroccan and Algerian. So who's next? Anybody of the Parliament? Or maybe that the army, now that the army is seen as the godfather of the new page in Algerian history, need to make, weave some sort of a compromise, maybe bring some new figures from the popular movement and some old.
All right, Nahid, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but thanks for that insight into it. A lot of questions to be asked. Nahid Abu Zaid from BBC Arabic. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. Africa is a step closer to realizing the dream of a single market after Gambia ratified the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. It becomes the 22nd country which is the minimum required to sign and ratify the treaty. It brings into force the single trading bloc with an estimated market size of 1.7 billion people. 6 schoolgirls who were earlier accused of scribbling on photos of President Pierre Nkurunziza have been permanently banned from attending any school in the country. The schoolgirls were released from detention last week after outrage among social media users and exiled Burundi activists. Authorities in Nigeria have unveiled a tax amnesty program for defaulters who voluntarily declare their foreign assets. Justice Minister Abubakar Malami said the amnesty is for a 12-month period and will provide a permanent waiver of criminal prosecution to owners of offshore assets that are willing to declare those assets. Now, it's been 2 years since Yahya Jammeh resigned under regional military pressure after he refused to concede defeat in the Gambia's 2016 elections. 2 recent reports have accused the former Gambian president of widespread plunder of the country's resources. Umaru Fofana reports from the Gambia.
The Gambia is still reeling from the aftermath of Yahya Jammeh's rule. Life is an everyday struggle for many as the economy remains challenged. The man who led the country for 22 years is accused of running it aground. The state has just published a report compiled from interviews with 253 witnesses looking into the activities of a man who once told me that he would rule for 1 billion years. The results of the nearly 2-year investigations claims he stole millions of dollars. The former president is alleged to have pillaged state resources to finance his ostentatious lifestyle. These Bentley and Rolls-Royce cars parked here are emblematic of how he enjoyed basking in that luxury. His monthly salary was less than 10,000 United States dollars, but he had a fleet of these and other luxury cars custom-made for him. This comes as a group of investigative journalists take these claims a step further, saying former President Jammeh and his close associates stole close to $1 billion, including more than $350 million from the state telecommunications company, another $325 million from the illicit timber trade, $70 million from the central bank, and $60 million from the country's pension fund. While much more than the state's estimates, the government believes these numbers could be true.
I have reason to believe that their reporting is accurate in view of the fact that this commission alone has established that former President Jammeh has embezzled nearly $600 to $700 million US if you put all the figures together. And also the fact that the commission was not able to investigate all of the former president's activities.
Jammeh fled the Gambia in 2017 and has since been living in exile in Equatorial Guinea. His APRC party leaders initially agreed to respond to the allegations, but would not make themselves available. The investigations into what happened during his rule will almost certainly continue. Umaru Fofana, BBC News, Banjul, the Gambia.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come, Mimi with all the sports headlines as we look ahead to 3 English Premier League matches today as Spurs host Crystal Palace in their brand new stadium. I'm Peter Okwoche. Welcome back. Now, hundreds of people poured onto the streets of Alexandra Township, just north of Johannesburg, demanding better public services, including the collection of rubbish. There was a heavy police presence with reports of rubber bullets being fired. Our correspondent Milton Nkosi sent this report.
We are in Alexandra Township, north of Johannesburg. As you can see, people have barricaded the road here. They are protesting for better public services. They want the municipality to pick up their rubbish. They want water, they want electricity, but also they want jobs. Most of these people are looking forward to the elections next month. South Africa is holding a general election, and in part this protest is linked to that. Let's ask some of these people why they are here today. Why are you protesting today?
Because we want electricity and petrol to be down.
Oh, the petrol is too expensive.
Yeah.
It's not just like about the service delivery. It's the politicians also. They don't care about Alexander and the people of Alexander.
People are angry. We are sick and tired. So Alexander, since 1994, people are applying for the RDP houses. Nothing had happened.
Foreigners, they take us as fools.
Well, you heard there for yourself what the people were telling us the protest is about and their demands. But look at this security here. These police officers are armed to the teeth. They're trying to stop the crowd from coming this way. Well, we have to see whether these types of protests will continue all the way up to the elections next month.
Milton Nkosi, BBC News in Alexandra Township, Johannesburg.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi, what have you got?
A lot of football today, Peter. There has been a lot of reaction throughout social media today after Juventus forward Maurice Ka was subjected to racist chanting by supporters and then blamed by his teammate for inciting the crowd. It happened on Tuesday during a Serie A game against Cagliari. The 19-year-old, who is of Ivorian heritage, scored their second goal and then went on to celebrate in front of a section of the stadium that targeted him throughout the game. Coming up shortly, you can hear it in the video right here just after he scores there. Now, this action led to criticism by his manager, Max Allegri, and Leonardo Bonucci, who he plays with. And that got African stars to respond with this. Nigeria international Leon Balogun wrote, "We're standing united behind you, brother," wondering how Bonucci would react if you do the same thing in front of him after scoring your next goal. And former Ivory Coast captain Yaya Toure has had his say. Toure says Leonardo Bonucci suggesting that his teammate Maurice Ka was partly to blame for the racist abuse he received is unbelievable and was very hurt when he heard about it. He was speaking at an equal game conference held by UEFA at Wembley today. The 35-year-old told the BBC that more should be done to tackle racism.
When something like that happens, we have to send a strong message, not only to the fans, but to the people on the top as well, you know, because something has to be done, because we're tired of always coming back, coming in the same problem, you know what I mean? It starts to be problematic, you know, that one, to be honest. And we can sit and there talking about that, go home and tomorrow something happen again, you're going to go again, back again, talking about that, and it's going to still continuing, and I'm very worried about it. I think if you, until those people in the stands, the people for the government on the top don't decide anything, it's always going to happen. And yeah, what we're going to do, we're going to continue to come and sit out there and talking, and nothing's going to be done.
There are 3 English Premier League matches today. Algerian star Riyad Mahrez's Manchester City could go back to the top of the table when they host Cardiff City. The visitors will be doing without Ivory Coast's Sol Bamba, who is out due to injury for the rest of the season. Another match to look out for will be Tottenham Hotspur, who will be hosting Crystal Palace in their brand new stadium at White Hart Lane. Spurs haven't had a win in 5 games in the league. Victory could see them ahead of Arsenal and into 3rd. Palace manager Roy Hodgson Robertson is positive about his side's chances.
We're somewhat strange in the sense that we always go into every game thinking we've got a chance to win, whether it's Tottenham or anybody else for that matter. And by the same token, we don't take any victories for granted. It's very difficult to say. I mean, it's going to be an extremely good occasion. I'm really happy that, you know, it's fallen our way, that we happen to be the team that Tottenham are playing on the day. Whether it turns out to be advantageous in any way, we just have to wait and see. I somewhat doubt it. I think Tottenham will be so anxious to do so well that we're going to see the very, very best Tottenham that you can see.
A quick look at some other stories. Nigeria international Samuel Chukwueze and Cameroon's Carl Toko Ekambi are two of the African stars who scored for Villarreal on Tuesday in their 4-4 draw against Barcelona. Villarreal had been leading before two late goals by the La Liga leaders. And Ghana captain Elizabeth Addo has joined Chinese Super League Jiangsu Suning. The 25-year-old midfielder has signed a 1-year deal with the club as a free agent after leaving USA side Seattle Reign in February. And that's all the sport. Back to you, Peter.
Many thanks, Mimi. Now, Kenyan fishermen have criticized the government's move to lift a ban on fish imports barely 4 months after it was imposed last year. They say imports have crippled a fishing sector that's already suffered from overfishing and a lack of access to markets. Victor Kenani reports from the fishing town of Kisumu on Lake Victoria.
It's a busy morning at Dunga Beach on the shores of Lake Victoria. The area is buzzing with activity as vendors rush to buy the fresh catch brought in by the fishermen who have been out at sea all night. But the buyers, many of whom have been waiting since daybreak to buy the fish, say volumes have dipped.
There was a lot of fish back then. Walking on the shores, you would see fish thrown away. These days, it's not the same. I used to buy a lot of fish and take sometimes 20 tons to factor, and other times 100 tons in a day.
Bernard Ngala is a father of 7 and has been fishing in these waters for close to a decade now. He is disappointed that the nets he cast the previous day have brought in nothing.
I've thought about quitting fishing because, you see, the difficulties we have in the lake here, coming to the lake at times and getting no catch while you have a family to feed. If we can diversify, even in farming, that would assist us.
The lake, which is the largest freshwater body in Africa, has been depleted of its most important resource because of bad practice. This is Dunga Beach on the shores of Lake Victoria. The small fishing community here tells me a few years back, these boats will have been in the high waters looking for fish, but now they lie idle here as the business has become unproductive. According to data from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, Kenya produces about 135,000 tons of fish annually against an annual demand of 500,000 tons. The Kenyan government says this high demand for fish forced it to lift the ban on imports in March this year. But local fishermen decry this as another blow to the fishing industry, which they say is already on its knees. In the largest fish market in the lakeside city of Kisumu, the vendors claim their once booming business is at a risk of closing down as many customers are no longer interested in buying locally sourced fish, which sell for twice the price of imported ones. The government maintains that the move to allow fish imports was to protect the country against the lake tilapia virus. The government says it plans to retrain fishermen to know how to fish more sustainably, as well as crack down on illegal fishing. But they acknowledge that it will take time for the fishing industry to improve. Victor Kenani, BBC News.
And that's it from the program. Don't forget you can get in touch with me and some of the team on Twitter. I'm at Okwache. But for now, from me, Peter Okwache, and the rest of the Focus on Africa team, thanks for watching. Goodbye.